Kaba osha chaha we kak wuk warsha welchach lach. Eis workte with
Cuánta dulzura y valor de una madre y su niño que migra y camina hacia una vida mejor. If this is really the home of the brave, may our gates now be open for you. Have the courage to walk through a perilous fight with a child in your arms. Our children are sacred. Nuestros niños son sagrados. Our children are beautiful. Bellos son. Our children are gifts. El regalo más amado. Our children are sacred. Sagrados son. Y aquí están, cruzando fronteras. Y aquí están, trayendo la verdad. Son la voz de amor y nuestra conciencia, pues por la violencia cruzando está. Nuestros niños son sagrados. Ay, bellos son. Son un regalo más amado. Sagrados son. Here they come, eyes wide open to the violence we have caused. And they come bearing gifts for a better tomorrow, healing the sorrow and opening hearts.
Now tell me who's got the right to take these fingers out of my palm. My mom's taking away, my pops is hating the state. This blanket doesn't keep me warm. They got these little kids locked up like animals on a farm. The separation doesn't harm, no es justo, es un abuso y te acuso de ser sucio. Es hora de cambiar el instituto. Luchamos y aguantamos, nunca hemos sido brutos. El sistema está quebrado, hemos sido abandonados. Me siento bravo, nos tratan como esclavos y no estamos unidos en los estados. Los corazones de mi gente están maltratados.
Llenos de esperanza, una vida con ganas de amar. Son las maestras, doctores, artistas, madres, ingenieras de un mundo de paz. Nuestros niños son sagrados, bellos son. Regalo más amado, sagrados son. Our children are sacred. We welcome and embrace the family, yeah, and give them love. We declare sanctuary, building bridges, not walls. Our children are sacred. Hey, we must protect our children. Our children are sacred. Show them how that love is really real. Our children are sacred. Hey, they got to know, got to know, got to know that love, that love is real in this world. Quererlos amarlos. Our children are sacred. Our children are sacred. Our children are sacred. Children are sacred. Our children are sagrados.
Hi, buenas tardes, buenas noches. Welcome, everyone. My name is Ani Rivera. I'm the Executive Director at Galería La Raza, and it's such an honor to be here with you tonight. Want to welcome our co-host tonight, Olga Talamante, who's the co-chair also of the Caravana por los Niños, Caravan for the Children campaign. We are on the countdown. We are one day away. We leave tomorrow to D.C., and we're about 8 days to the 100th day since our campaign launched. We are here tonight to gather, to continue to feel the love that we felt all the way from San Diego, Tijuana, and continue on this journey. We gather under the full moon tonight. A todos mis lunáticos, tonight is our night of gathering. Tonight is the night that we gather to set intention. Our lunada usually is focused on floricanto, spoken word, an open mic. Today we're doing something a little different in honor of the campaign that we've all been working on. And so that's why we've asked special guests to join us to have a deep, meaningful conversation about, what we're going to undertake in the next couple of days. So Olga, welcome. It's so great to have you in this lunada tonight. Honoring the moon, the goddess. ¿Qué nos cuentas?
Well, I think it's a great time to gather right before we take off early tomorrow morning to go to Washington, D.C. To continue our caravan for the children, which, as many of you know, there's our flag, and it is about uncaging, reunifying, and healing the children that are still in detention. And then, of course, the thousands that are now arriving in the current time. And I don't know if you remember, Ani, we started in January 21st, the first day of the current new administration, to make sure that we were paying attention for the first 100 days of the administration, to elevate and make visible the issue of the children that are still caged and still not reunified and still not healed. And so it just has been a tremendous experience to work with Ani and the other leaders of the organizations that are part of our coalition, which includes Instituto Familiar de la Raza. Gloria Romero is the executive director there, and very honored to serve as co-chair of the coalition with her. We also have Larissa Dugan Cuadra of Carecen, San Francisco. Day in and day out, Carecen is fighting for our immigrant community's rights. We also have Adriana Ayala, executive director of Chicana Latina Foundation, of which I continue to be a proud member of the board, and so is Ani. And also very good to have the Latinx Racial Equity Project, which does a lot of racial equity lens development, training, and advocacy. And of course, the executive director of Galería de la Raza, Ani Rivera, who has been just the mastermind and lead organizer of the Artivism component of our campaign. The coalition has been working since November, and we have held educational pláticas and charlas like this. We had a lunada last month. And so we're going to go to Washington, D.C. to mark the 100 days of the new administration. And we're telling the new administration, you still have a few more days. There is still things that you can do, and we still have hope. And of course, we'll mark that day with all of our fellow community organizations that are coming in from throughout the country, and also our local sister organizations in Washington, D.C., who are organizing the major rally in March, immigrant rights rally, on May 1st. So we will be there representing our Bay Area coalition and taking all of you in our hearts so that we can raise our demands of uncaging, reunifying, and healing the children.
Eso es todo. I think that I can say that, we started this with 100 days, and the work and what we've learned in these 100 days, we understand how complex the issues are. And yet, I don't know, Olga, what do you think? I think that the work doesn't end in 100 days. No, I think we visiting our border towns, cities of like Tijuana, and understanding what's happening even in San Diego and the impacts of what's, how our local communities are stepping up and supporting. I feel like I don't know if that's the answer, and I don't want to overcommit other organizations or other partners, but it clearly feels that, this work is here to stay for a long time. And so can you share with us your thoughts a little bit about coming back from San Diego, and what does it look like past this 100 days for just if we were to dream?
We have to stay in the fight. We have to stay on this campaign to make visible the situation that the children and the families are living through. As you mentioned, we were in Tijuana, where there are about 18 shelters and organizations that are supporting the families that have been waiting there, some of them years, right?
Yeah.
Because they are being denied the due process of seeking asylum, which is a right in this country. And so we have that situation. We have the unaccompanied minors that are coming in, over 20,000, that are being distributed throughout the country. That is another situation. We can't just abandon them. And we're so glad that we have sister organizations in San Diego that are welcoming them with lots of love, with lots of support. So we want to continue to support them. And then there is still what caused our coalition to form was the over 600 children that were detained in 2018 under the zero tolerance policy of the past administration. And so 3-4 years later, those children are still separated. And if you recall, Annie, that's what spurred us on. That's what we said. We have to come together. We have to do something. It is our responsibility to do something for those children. Those are our children. Many of us share the transborder experience. And so we feel it. We can only imagine what it must be like for those children to be separated from their children, from their parents. And so we have several instances of this inhumane immigration policies that our people have to live under. We have the detained children in ICE. We have the unaccompanied minors arriving daily into communities that, fortunately, most of them are welcoming them. And then we have the thousands of families on the borders waiting to be processed. So it is complex, and I think we need to stay on it.
See, we got to keep our fingers on the pulse on this one. So it sounds like we're going to be hearing from more folks. You're going to be hearing from us throughout, this year as we continue to keep our eyes and ears on the ground and supporting our organizations and partners. Want to give a really special shout out to those folks that we met and we learned from, and seeing the work and in the conditions that they're working. We give all our love and support to them. Centro 32 out of Tijuana. In the U.S. side, we have Casa Familiar, the South Bay Community Services, who are the women just at the forefront, providing love and care to these children. So, the one really important piece about this campaign that I was so honored and appreciative as a director of an arts organization, a community-based arts organization, was how we've centered art, whether it has been literary art, whether it's been visual art, whether it's been, performance and experimental and the whole process, that we centered it as a way to create, to shift the narrative of how we look at migration. And in this case, how, media, mainstream media, sometimes informed by the right, really kind of takes over and creates a narrative of distrust and further others, our community. And so centering art and a way to bring joy, in a way to call out the situation by honoring and dignifying our people and saying, our migrants are not helpless or they're caught in the violence of these laws, but yet they're very resilient, and they have a dream, and they've been surviving across borders. And so I think this message around the children was really important, to center art, to make sure that we were calling those that have lived it. We had Yosimar Reyes, shout out to Yosimar, also came with us in this caravan, gave us some words through his experience, and really how to center joy in all of this. And healing is part of that. How do we center healing and joy and resiliency? And we know that, our organizations are ready and capable, and our people will thrive if we have the right combination. So it's been an honor to be able to center art in that conversation, to be able to dream, to invest also in the artists who, in many cases, the last year have been also isolated because of COVID and surviving, and being able to bring them back and have him have first voice in this process has also been just a profoundly inspiring experience to work with you all. So I think tonight, that's what we're focusing on, is understanding the history of art and activism and words of liberation. I think it's always been artists that have centered us, that have, created, what is it? You say it once, Olga, that they create
well, I think we've talked about it in different formats, and so they give us the images that reflect the reality of our struggles, and then they give us the words that beautify and make just so make give us strength, and then and so they give us the images, they give us the words, they give us the music that feeds our soul. To be able to continue in the struggle, and keep us fortified and keep us fed. So we could not have our movements could not have survived if we didn't have art. And so I'm just so glad that we do have that as a big center of the way that we're doing our campaign.
Well said. So that's what we're here to do today, to continue to call that in. To center on our roots and traditions in our ritual, which is the lunada. We're not focusing it straight just on literary words tonight. We're going to really be thinking about how we put it into action. So yes, whoever you pray to, whoever you call to, tonight we honor the moon. We set the intention forth, and what an amazing blessing to be able to gather right before we leave to ground ourselves in that. So in doing this work, you and I have been in conversation, and we couldn't, there's a history of activism. There's a history of culture that has always informed, as you said. And so I know you we had been talking back and forth, and then it sort of solidified the idea of bringing those folks that have influenced even us in our project. And so I want to hand it over to you, Olga, to talk a little bit about our special guest tonight, and then we can talk a little bit more about the project that we're going to be unveiling in DC.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Annie. Yes, I'm just so honored that I get to introduce someone that is known as a fighter, as an organizer, as an activist, total ally to the immigrant rights movement, and such a good friend of ours. And so I do want to read the official introduction, because it's important to mark all those various things that Cleve Jones has done. But on a personal level, I just want to say Cleve Jones has been there. And I think both of us probably have been around about the same amount of time, Cleve. But when in 2018, there he is. Hi, Cleve. In 2018, when the zero tolerance policy was fully implemented by the past administration, we also learned that there was an ICE detention center in Richmond, and Cleve Jones, started with, I don't know who called whom, but it was you, Kay Kendall, Annie, Maria Iquez Martinez, Francisco, and then we said, okay, we have to go to the Richmond Detention Center and set up the vigils. And eventually that center was closed, right? We were part of the No Hate march and rally that you organized, that you coordinated, and then we were also part of that. And of course, you known for many things, but certainly the AIDS quilt. I want to read a little bit because I want to make sure that I get this right, and then I'll get back to it. So let me just introduce you officially to Cleve Jones, who is an American human rights activist, author, and lecturer. He joined the gay liberation movement in the early 1970s. He was mentored by pioneer LGBT activist Harvey Milk, and worked in Milk's City Hall office as a student intern until Milk's assassination, 1978. And I remember those days, sad days for our community. Cleve also co-founded the San Francisco AIDS Foundation in 1983 and founded the Names Project AIDS Memorial Quilt, one of the world's largest community arts projects in 1987. And it's so connected to our project that we have in our hands with Paola leading that. We'll talk about that a little bit more. He also led the 2009 National March for Equality in Washington, D.C., and served on the advisory board of the American Foundation for Equal Rights, which challenged California's Proposition 8 in the U.S. Supreme Court. So he's been in some high places, and we have him here locally, still in San Francisco, and also still an organizer for the Hospitality Workers Union Unite here. And our latest collaboration was when Chicana Latina Foundation was going to have its annual gala at one of the hotels that went on the picket line the day before we were to have our dinner. And we immediately talked with Cleve. We said, well, we cannot cross the picket line. Annie and our board came together. We said, we're not going to go not going to hold the dinner. We'll negotiate with the hotel later, because the parents of our Chicana Latina Foundation awardees work in those hotels. I mean, that's who our people are. And instead of going to the dinner, we actually went to the picket line that evening. And so it's just such an honor, Cleve, to have you with us in the struggle, still making good trouble, as you have been doing for many years. So welcome to our conversation tonight.
Thank you very much. I'm actually out in the country right now, so I'm going to keep my microphone muted so you're not overwhelmed with the sound of the quail that have invaded my yard as we're talking here. I'll also warn you that my immediate next door neighbor is a donkey who has a tendency to make appalling noises when I'm in the middle of talking. But this is where I've been sheltered in place since the pandemic began. And it's wonderful to see you, and I look forward to our conversation. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Well, it's my honor now to bring into the conversation Paola de la Calle, who's been the artist in residence with Galería in this project. And I'll read a little bit about what she does and where she's from. But I just want to give a shout out to Paola as always willing to join what I call our circus. You know, we have a lot of fun. We get into a lot of good trouble, as it was said before, and always willing to find a solution. And as Olga said, create those visuals and narratives that inform what our dreams are and how we're trying to, show up in the world. So Paola is a Colombian-American interdisciplinary artist who examine home, borders, identity, and nostalgia. Her practice is multidisciplinary exploration that ties together her family's migration, personal memories, as well as the historic and political narratives through the use of textiles, printmaking, and collage. And overall, just fabulous eye at detail and knowing how to get us, when I see Paola's work, it reminds me of Tomás Ibarra Fraustro's, work when he talks about rascuachismo. And it doesn't mean that it's something that it's negative. It's something that really calls to home, and that the day-to-day and the ordinary defines who we are. And so I love the collage work that you do. I love how you bring in everyday elements to honor everyday experiences and values. So thank you so much. And I'm just so excited to see you both, Paola and Cleve, have a conversation on this, practice around textile and why textile is so important as a practice. And so, from an intergenerational viewpoint, can we talk about what informed your practice? So, I'll start with asking the question of Cleve, because I don't think that maybe some of our audience knows the story, but, for new audiences, if you can talk to us about the AIDS Memorial Quilt, how did it originate, and why was it important for you to memorize this moment in time? As I was mentioning earlier, I still remember being maybe 10 years old, just under 10 years old, seeing the quilt displayed in the National Mall. How, for the first time, I think in my childhood, it was hearing the word AIDS on TV and what it meant to see it. I didn't even think then that I understood the entire impact, but I want to hear from you, how did you get there?
Well, thank you. This is, there's some sad timing going on here, because in a few weeks, we're going to come to the 40th anniversary of the very first word of what we now call HIV/AIDS. It was the publication of a few paragraphs in the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report out of the Centers for Disease Control, which described clusters of gay men in Los Angeles, New York, and San Francisco who were dying of some illness that seemed to be destroying their immune systems. I happened to be working in the legislature at that time as a legislative assistant to the Assembly Health Committee. So that's why I was reading all of these public health journals. I remember being quite disturbed by it. And shortly afterwards, I was contacted by a physician named Dr. Marcus Conant, who was a dermatologist at UCSF. And he told me that he had a patient that he wanted me to see. And he took me up there to the hospital, and this poor young man, his name was Simon Guzman. He was on in isolation wards. We had to wear hazmat suits to go in. And there was the only humanizing thing about his situation as he lay there dying was that his mother and his nieces had visited him and placed some photographs on the table next to his bed. And in the photographs, you see this, I think they were from Jalisco, and you see this beautiful athletic young man playing on the beach with his nieces and throwing them up in the air. And then on the bed, this destroyed body that would soon lose his struggle. So that was the first time I saw someone who would die of AIDS, and he's one of the first panels in the quilt. That was June of 1981. By the fall of 1985, in San Francisco, almost everyone I knew was dead or dying or caring for someone who was dying. And it was a horrible fight against the pandemic, but it was also a horrible fight against the cruel administration in Washington, D.C., and the people who openly celebrated our misfortune. People like the recently departed Rush Limbaugh, and they had a Republican state convention in I think Long Beach, where they had bumper stickers that said, "AIDS, it's killing all the right people." And by all the right people, of course, they meant homosexuals, they meant IV drug users, they meant sex workers, they meant black-skinned Haitian immigrants. I don't think they intended to mean hemophiliacs, but it's important to remember that an entire generation of hemophiliacs was wiped out by this disease. And we in San Francisco, it was very, very hard because we all lived so close to each other. And even though the mainstream media focused on it as really sort of if you just watch the mainstream media, you'd think it was a disease of affluent white gay men. But we in San Francisco were losing so many people. And we knew then that this wasn't just a gay disease. This wasn't just attacking white people, that these mistakes that we were making based on these bigoted and unscientific assumptions were going to have a consequence. And, looking back now, after all these decades, I still find it so heartbreaking that a disease that was dismissed first as just a disease that only affected gay men, and then as a disease that only affected people of color, that combination of homophobia and racism, it led ultimately to the death of over 30 million, mostly heterosexual men and women and their children across the planet, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa and in Southeast Asia. So by 1985, my heart was breaking, and the story of the quilt is really connected also to the story of Harvey Milk, because every year on November 27th, we honor the memory of Mayor George Moscone and Supervisor Harvey Milk, who were sort of among the original architects of the progressive coalition in San Francisco that brought together feminists and environmentalists and ethnic communities and what we now call LGBTQ, trade unions. And they, of course, were murdered on November 27th, 1978. And every year on that day, we have a march. We light our candles and we march again. So in 1985, as I was preparing for the march, and Olga remembers well, I'm sure, the days where you turned people out with your staple gun and your bullhorn, and we didn't have the internet, and I'm walking up and down the Castro and Mission and Haight, putting up posters, and saw the headline that 1,000 San Franciscans had already died of AIDS. And that just was, I knew most of them. I didn't know all of them as friends, but they were my neighbors, colleagues, friends. I was going to San Francisco State, and it was just so difficult, and the world was ignoring it. And so that night when we marched, I had Harvey Milk's I had Harvey's bullhorn, and I said, we've lost a lot more than Harvey. And 1985, Harvey was killed in 78. We're marching in 1985. I'm saying we've lost so much more than Harvey. I had stacks of poster board and some marker pens. And I asked people to write the names of their loved ones who had been killed by the new disease. And at first, they were hesitant because the stigma associated with the disease was so overwhelming that people were ashamed to name their dead. And that, when you think about that, that's a pretty horrible thing. And but gradually, people began to write the names, and we marched, as we always do, to City Hall and left our candles there. And then I had everybody go to the old Federal Building, which housed Reagan's Health and Human Services Department, West Coast offices, and we'd hidden ladders in the shrubbery and climbed up with big rolls of tape and just covered the entire front wall of the Federal Building with this patchwork of names. And it was a very cold, drizzly night, typical, late November, and there were no songs or speeches or chanting, just people, thousands and thousands, standing in the damp fog and reading these names and whispering, I didn't know he was dead. I didn't know he was sick. We went to school together. And you could just feel the yearning, almost desperate need to find a way to grieve together for our loved ones who'd been killed so horribly, so early in their lives, but also to try to warn the world of what was coming. And after I got off my ladder, I wandered through the crowd and could hear what people were saying. And then I looked back over their heads at that patchwork on the wall, and I thought, well, it looks like some kind of strange quilt. I thought of my grandma. I thought of my great-grandma. They were dirt poor in central Indiana, and no fabric was ever thrown away until it disintegrated. It wasn't a situation where you could just go to the store and buy a new pair of jeans every other month. So everything was repurposed. And I think that quilts have such obvious symbolism of, they're usually made in the tradition of our country, they're usually made from discarded fabric that's been repurposed, different textures, different colors, different patterns, and sewn together into works of art that are comforting and provide warmth and love. And there is still a quilt on my bed that was made by my great-grandmother when she learned that my mother was pregnant with me. So that's the, I'm sorry that took so long, but that's the story of the quilt. And we we created it to offer people a way to express their grief, first and foremost, to illustrate the enormity of the crisis, to get beyond the cold, sterile statistics, to show that every one of these people was loved. They left behind families and friends and comrades who loved them. And we also created it, it was never to be a passive memorial. It was a weapon in our war. And that's why it was designed to be displayed on the National Mall, to shame the president and the Congress with the evidence of their inaction. And it was a powerful condemnation. I want to say one other thing, and then I will shut up. But another thing that I didn't expect was, there were a few things. I didn't expect just how much joy and love people gained by working with their hands and fabric while sharing stories. There was something really magical about that. And as the project grew, thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people were sitting in church and synagogue basements, on the living room floors, in parks, and working with that fabric, needle and thread, glue guns, glitter, whatever, while they told their stories. So I think part of the power of it came from matching that tactile, physical piecing things together with the verbal articulation of why we loved people. I never was prepared for the artistry of it. Some of the works are just, I mean, each panel is 3 feet by 6 feet, the approximate size of a grave. It was extraordinary. And then I never also really imagined how could one imagine the sacred space that was created when it was displayed. And looking back at that time, I think really one of the subconscious influences that I had in my mind was the Vietnam Memorial Wall by Maya Lin, and just the simplicity of it. And when you go there and you see the way people approach the wall and find the name that's etched there of their ancestor. And so it turned out to be very effective, and also was an entry point to the movement that attracted people who would not otherwise join ACT UP and put on the Black Doc Martens and the leather bomber jacket and storm the NIH, like my grandmothers. I wanted a place for them in the movement, and for people like them, because I knew that they loved me more than anybody.
Wow, that's just so. I think that's so important, what you just said, what you closed. I think as organizers, we've been taught, if you have to explain it to your grandmother, then you're not doing it right, because it has to be accessible for everyone.
Exactly.
And so that's really moving. And to the point that you said, the ritual of engaging with your hands and speaking must have been so transformative and healing to every single one that participated. So just for technical things, like what's the square footage? How many square feet is the project now?
I don't even know. The last time we displayed it in its entirety, it covered the entire National Mall in Washington, D.C. So think of that when you get there. You can see that. I'm also very happy to say that, yes, it's 54 tons. I'm very happy to say that the quilt has finally been returned to San Francisco. It was in Atlanta, Georgia, and thanks largely to the good work of the late Representative John Lewis and Speaker Nancy Pelosi, we were able to get the quilt back to San Francisco, and in partnership with the AIDS Memorial Grove in Golden Gate Park. So these are two very powerful memorials to that time that, and we have seen, in the last 15, 16 months, just how important it is that we don't forget what we were supposed to have learned from that pandemic. And one of the things that has been very difficult for me, I'll say, as someone who's getting older, to sit here in this beautiful spot in the country, surrounded by the nature, and watching my country make the same stupid mistakes they did before, to see yet again the racial disparity in access to healthcare play out, to see yet again how conspiracy-minded denialists could disrupt things, seeing again, another Republican president who did not care and did not know what to do and failed to act. There's just so many parallels, and of course there's some things that are dissimilar, but what this has done to working class people in our country, I thank Olga for mentioning Unite Here. That's the hospitality workers. By this time last year, 98% of our members were laid off. And of course, with the brilliant system we've got in this country, they lost their health care. So in the middle of the pandemic, and the burden falls so much greater on women workers and on immigrant workers. And that's who our union represents. We're overwhelmingly women of color, immigrant women, and it's been hard. And most of them are still not back at work. And when you add into that many of them are not citizens and are fearful of accessing healthcare, fearful of signing up for even the vaccines now. And I think one thing we can be proud of as San Franciscans is that we're doing everything we can to make sure that our immigrant families are getting access to the vaccines.
Yeah. I got to give a shout out to the Latino Task Force that has been on the ground, making sure that, folks are getting vaccinated and continuing to do that work. It's the parallels are uncanny in how things are happening and how, in many ways, history is repeating itself, unfortunately. And so, Olga, do you want to move into maybe the Paola questions, and then we can have them both speak to one another?
Yes, I'd love to. And let me get my questions right here. And I just a real quick addition, Cleve. Just I want to honor so many brothers, so many people that we lost. We were like going to funeral service to funeral service to funeral service, and I just want to mention a very good friend, Felipe Nevares, from the Mission. He was a dancer, Puerto Rico dancer. He lived right on his mom still lives on Tweed Avenue, and his family put together one of the quilts. I mean, one of the quilt sections for him, and I was always so proud that they did that.
Olga, did you know Felix Velarde Munoz? He was a lawyer for MALDEF.
Oh, now the name sounds familiar from MALDEF.
Velarde Munoz. We were dating when he was diagnosed, and man, it was so many of them went so fast. I think that was. Now we understand that they'd been sick for years and just didn't know it, but. I think it's very difficult for young people to comprehend that we were watching hundreds of people die every month, and the Bay Area Reporter every week on Thursday would come out with entire pages full of little tiny thumbnail obituaries, and it was just a horrible time.
It was a battle zone. We thought we were really in a war and just losing people. So I was so just so moved when I heard about the project that Paola was going to be leading that was related to a quilt, for the children. And that came about because of wanting to embrace them, with these images, with this love, and Annie and I were talking about it. It was like it's like the AIDS quilt. That's what the AIDS quilt represented. It represented struggle and it represented love, and you just really framed it so well, especially as people were doing that work. So I want to get to the question to Paola to bring her into the conversation of this amazing project. So Paola, can you tell us a bit about the quilts that you created under your residency with Galería de Raza for the caravan, for the children campaign? And what prompted you to choose poetry as a vehicle for the quilt's messages? And I have another question, but I want to just leave you with those for now.
Yeah, I mean, first, I'm honored to be here and to be sharing space with Cleve. I mean, like Annie and Olga both mentioned, your work really inspired a lot of our project, and the way in which quilt making is a really tender act. And I think that was what was really driving me in this project, is thinking about all of the ways in which we talk about uncaging the children, we talk about reunifying with their families, but there's this element of the Caravana por los Niños, or para los niños, that really emphasizes the healing. And so often we're presented with images of children getting tear gassed at the border, of getting ripped from their mother's arms, of being wrapped in those Mylar blankets. And I think that those images, they're really traumatic, and they make folks relive that trauma. And something that I really wanted to do was present a counter narrative to the images that we were seeing presented. And time and time again, those images of the children wrapped in those Mylar cold, sterile blankets just kind of kept reappearing. And I really wanted to emphasize community, and quilt making is in and of itself something that community is involved in. You're kind of stitching together, like you were saying, the textures and the colors and these fabrics. And because of the pandemic, the ways in which we were engaging with other artists or community members really had to shift, which is where the idea of the poetry came in. And in my own practice, I use a lot of poetry. I'm inspired by poetry. And I think poets often offer images that we can't create. They help us create them in our own minds. And I really wanted to focus on perspectives of healing and joy and resistance. And I wanted it to be community. So that's kind of the way that poetry made its way into the quilts, was thinking about how the poet's words could kind of inspire the images that then became all of the different panels in the quilt themselves. And I mean, the quilts themselves are, even the size of the quilt are kind of inspired by Cleve's project. So it's 5 very large quilts that combined are over 600 square feet, which at the time were marking the over 600 children that were missing, that we couldn't identify where they had been placed, and couldn't reunify with their families. So that number itself was kind of a call to action as well, and representative of the kids. So, I mean, not to say too much, because I know we're unveiling them on May 1st, but I really wanted to include voices of the children themselves. So often we hear journalists talking about it, lawyers talking about it, organizers talking about it, and we don't really see or hear any of the children. But what we do see is, again, those really traumatic images of them behind cages. So in my research, I found some images that children had drawn while they were in the detention centers. And throughout the quilts, you'll see some of those images kind of reappear to make sure that those voices were included in as well, because they're there, they have a story to tell. They are the ones living this experience. And I think that it's important that we're not saying that we're giving voice to anyone, because they already have voices. But what we're doing is we're amplifying that message. So that's the image that you're seeing right there.
And for those that want to see the complete unveiling, let's keep praying to the rain gods that they hold back. But we're going to be unveiling the 5 quilts May 1st at the Action in D.C. For those of you watching from afar, if you want to volunteer with us, I'm doing a plug because we need support in carrying. We will be marching with them, and we would love to have some support there.
But yeah, the quilts themselves, I want to give a shout out to we had 10 poets from across the United States who all have a relationship to the border, whether that's that they're migrants themselves or are undocumented or are first generation, who all lent their poetry to the quilts themselves. So we didn't get to see them really in the images, but throughout the quilts, there are poems and pieces of poems that are kind of stitched together to provide more joy in our resistance, some healing, and some visions for the future, that where we can imagine the children being uncaged and reunified with their families.
Yeah, you just have explained it so beautifully, Paola, and you can see, Cleve, that your work continues to live on and continues to inspire and continues to have a role in the work that is going on right now. It's so importantly, around the children, for them to be uncaged and reunified and healed. And so I'm sure you can tell what a joy it is for me to work with these amazing artists and leaders in our community, and know that we're continuing, that legacy of resistance and joy. I wanted to ask you another question, Paola. In terms of when you started, did other people's, contributions or perspectives, did it change your initial vision that you had when you started the project? And then maybe, Cleve, you can also maybe follow up with that and say, did things change along the way for you also in terms of how you imagine the quilt? But go ahead, Paola.
Yeah, so initially for me, I grew up in a mixed status family, so the issue of immigration for me has always been really present. But I'm also very aware of the fact that that's my perspective. So when I was presented with the opportunity to work as the lead artist, the first thing I said was I did not want this project to just be my voice, and that I think is what really drove the ways in which we got other community involved, the way we got the poets involved and other seamstresses, and the poets themselves, their words became the literal images that I used to create the quilts. So not only do you see their words in the quilts, but you see the way in which I interpreted their words and created images. So for a long time there, as we were planning, there was almost no image that we were working with, just the idea of the quilts themselves, and the symbolism behind working on a quilt, right? Thinking about remembrance, marking a moment in time, stitching together community. And then it wasn't until later on where we got the poets involved, where the imagery really started to inspire the work. So for a while there, we had some very blank quilts.
Blank canvas.
Yeah.
But the process was really beautiful to see it evolve. I'll just add a little bit from our perspective as providing support, not only, the technical, but just kind of holding space and really kind of like talking about, well, who has to be involved? Like, who can we make sure that we involve that can help us with the seams, that understand what we're working towards? And it was really beautiful to see local seamstresses that are involved in community step up and say, I'll take a blanket, and throw down to help. And, then having other folks step in to help and do other pieces, and right down to, allowing for the thought around what was the messaging in the imagery. Going back and forth with Paola and really having the moment and the space for thought partnership as a project was really important. And it was in those conversations that, the names quilt project came up a lot. I want to also give a shout out to artists that we were really kind of thinking about was Doris Salcedo in terms of how they use, numbers and spatial, takeover of public space to call out on violence. And this is a violent act when we're talking about children being, caged and detained or separated. It's violence. And it's a history of this country that we want to say, well, let's, how do we change the narrative and how do we continue to honor their stories? So no, it was a pleasure. It's been a pleasure to go from blank slates and then have the updates and be completely transformed, and then picking them up, finally seeing the detail of the quilting, the love that went into that. And so we're just really so proud of you, Paola, and thank Cleve also for giving us that sort of a story for us, that we know it to carry it and to continue to inform our work moving into the future. So just wanted to add that. Do you guys want to talk to each other as quilt fanaticos? What are your questions to each other? I feel like we're just hanging out and I love it. We just need a fire pit next time.
One of the things that was very cool for me was discovering how there were similar traditions all over the world. And, as a Midwesterner, white Midwestern working class family, when I thought of quilts, I thought of the pioneers crossing the prairie, and the bundling up their babies and making the campfire. I thought of the people who'd been brought here from Africa, who were salvaging fabric and creating the incredible tradition of African American quilting. So I thought of it really as a particularly American folk art. And then as the project took off and began to get media attention, the quilts began to come in from Brazil, from Singapore, from Japan, from India, and it was just really fascinating to see how almost every culture in the world has some variation of quilting. When you were talking about starting sort of with the blank, a couple of things that we did that we sort of stumbled on that were really right. We had no rules. People each panel was made individually. We hoped that they were made by people who knew the people they were memorializing. There was no prohibition of any kind of expression, except that if we discovered that you'd made a quilt for somebody that didn't actually die of AIDS, we would take that out. That only happened a few times, but that allowed for quite a great deal of expression of anger, which is sometimes jarring when one views the quilts. Another thing that happened that I think you might appreciate as an artist is that as a little core group assembled, including thankfully people who actually can sew, because I can't. And this woman named Gert kind of took over. She's the mother of the quilt and really sewed the whole damn thing together. But there was endless conversation about how we were going to display it. How would people view it? How would it be presented to the public? And most of the people wanted it suspended on walls or maybe even scaffolding. We also knew that we were going to go to the National Mall. And I think that the National Mall occupies such an important place in the collective psyche of our country. So, that's where we go. And so we struggled with this, and we settled on laying it on the ground. And that made a huge difference, because there's something different that happens when you're walking through the avenues of canvas that connect the giant squares of quilts. You're not looking at it up on a wall. It's not the experience of going to a museum or a gallery. It's more of you have entered a sacred space. And it's very much like visiting a cemetery. So that was something that just kind of happened. And then we had to figure out, well, how do we present it? And we're like, well, do we just roll up in trucks and bring out bins and just, and one of our early volunteers, a man named Jack Castor, who died early in the project, he was really just tortured by this notion. And one day he came in and was clearly seriously hungover. And he said, I figured it out. And he starts pulling out all these crumpled up cocktail napkins from one of our local taverns. And he said, I call it the lotus fold. And he showed how he'd taken, so each individual panel is 3 feet by 6 feet. We then sew them into the basic building unit of the quilt, which is 12 feet by 12 feet. And then they're edged with canvas and grommeted and linked together to form squares that are 24 feet by 24 feet. So It was Jack's idea to take the 4 corners of the large square, fold them into the center, and keep repeating until you had this tidy little package. And then you needed 8 people to unfold it. And we had them, so we trained all the volunteers on how to unfold this. So it was very dignified, and everybody wore white to honor the nurses that were on the front line. And we created this grid work of canvas walkways that these squares would be opened up to fill. And then when we did it, when we started opening the first ones, we realized that all of the bundles had been placed incorrectly, so that they would come out, the corners would come out onto the walkway, and they had to be moved and shifted. And one of our volunteers named Scott Lago, we had the old school walkie-talkies, and he said, oh shit, we placed them wrong. And this went out through the hole. And then he said, I want everybody to lift up the corner and move a quarter of the way around. And they picked up the corner, and the wind caught them, and it billowed. And I saw my grandma shaking out the quilt and putting it down on the bed. And then they turned. And that became a ritual that has been repeated tens of thousands of times in almost every country on the planet where HIV has killed people. And it's just kind of so interesting.
Yeah.
Basically mistakes ended up giving us such beauty and power.
That's how things happen.
Yeah. We'll have to document our quilting and veiling, because maybe something like that will happen, that it's all part of it. You just have to go with it, because, you can plan and plan and plan, and then it doesn't even, the universe has something else, ready for us to handle. So anyways, go ahead, Olga.
No, I just wanted to say, I love how just all of this, how it evolved for you, Cleve, and how it evolved for Paola. And what I'd like to say is that I don't think this is the last conversation that we're going to have about this. And I just want to thank you so much, Cleve, for joining us, for following the vision that we have come together, and that I know you totally agree with, which is to uncage, reunify, and heal the children. Absolutely. And I'm just so excited to have you be connected with Paola, our lead artist on this project. And like I said, the struggle's going to continue, right? Things are not going to get solved in 100 days, unfortunately. So what we have to continue is with our joy and our resilience and our resistance. So thank you both very much. I know we're going to now have an amazing poet that's going to join us to close out the program. But Paola and Cleve, thank you so much.
Thank you. We hope to see you in person, Cleve, when we show them in person. Yes. We're hopefully thinking maybe Dolores Park. We'll see. We're trying to identify a public space where they can be showcased. Yeah, so we will keep you posted. Thank you. Well, today we honored on the full moon. As everyone knows, our lunada is when we get together for Floricanto. It's when we call the artists and literary artists and spoken word artists to come and join us and share a few words of realness, and is how we heal. And so we didn't have a full lineup, but we wanted to make sure that we honored, because there's so much literary arts involved in this public art project. And it is also, April is National Poetry Month, that we wanted to make sure that we stayed in the tradition and brought in our poets. And one of the folks that submitted to the artist call when we reached out was none other than Mercy Tullis-Bukhari. I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. And so we wanted to continue to create space and have some words by this poet, and remember that words matter, and that, you know, our words change and document who we are and what our visions are. And so it's my pleasure to introduce Mercy, who's a poet, essayist, and fiction writer who is Bronx-bred Afro-Latina, Honduran, and Garifuna of Jamaican descent. Her first book of poetry, titled Smoke, published by Blind Beggar Press, Inc. Mercy was named one of the 8 authors bringing Afro-Latina stories to the forefront by Remezcla magazine, and was Pushcart Prize nominee in 2016 for her essay, Black Dolls for Everyone. Her third anthology of poetry will be published by Get Fresh Books Publishing. Mercy teaches high school English language arts in the southeast section of the Bronx and is completing her first novel during quarantine. She currently lives in New Rochelle, New York, with her 2 children. So welcome, and the mic is yours, Mercy.
Hey, thank you so much. What an honor to share this space with the AIDS Quilt Guide. Because you hear about this all your life, you see it on television, and what an honor to share this space with you, Mr. Jones, and to be invited into the space to share my art and to read my poetry. Yo soy hondureña americana, soy garifuna americana, so it's important that we recognize that there are Black, Central, and South Americans who are also risking their lives crossing the borders. So I'm here to remind everyone of that, because I'm a first generation Bronxite New Yorker, and it's important that people understand, respect, and accept and recognize that Black people are also risking their lives crossing the border as well. So with that said, I'm going to start with a poem called La Gringa's First Ride to Los Hondos. Esta gringa flew to Honduras when she was 5 years old on the lie that she was going to meet Mickey Mouse, because esta gringa could not stop crying while boarding this monstrous-sized thing that was supposed to stay afloat high in the air. We flew from Kennedy Airport into clouds and over pineapple plantations and banana fields, cows roaming, and campesinos working sand, and beaches con hondos strong as the ancestors pleading from esta gran gringa to go back. When we landed, esta gringa asked, bueno, where's Mickey Mouse? Because of course, Mickey Mouse should be waiting for esta gringa on the tarmac. Her mommy ignored the question. She pushed her past the initial slap of hot, humid air, took her down the aircraft stairs, walked her across the tarmac into the building of the airport. We searched for our suitcases in a room where suitcases were thrown at random places on the floor. We were like roaches scattering when the light goes on, looking for our bags, yelling across the room, encontré una! Well, we found the bag. Mommy, slipping a $10 US bill to the woman who manually checked the suitcases we found, patted the top of the tightly packed items of clothes and soaps and shoes and more clothes and unknown duct tape packages from Tia Melba, y Tia Lorna, y Tia Carmen, all of who were really not really mis tías, for Abuelita, fulano, y fulano, y fulano. We had to return to the airport the following week for one missing suitcase. Esta gringa played futbolito barefooted in the sand that was her soil. Within the confused gaze of the neighbors, esta gringa swam in the sand granules and poured buckets of sand on her head. Esta gringa washed the sand off her body in the big sink behind the house, the same sink her mommy used to hand wash her clothes. She chased chickens around the house, danced punta, ate la comida, split coconuts, and heard her mommy yelled to curious passerbys con orgullo, ella es una gringa, ciudadana americana. Esta gran gringa looks back at a time when being gringa actually mattered. Esta gringa watched a garifuna man walk to a canoe with a net, come back to shore with fish in his net. She watched a garifuna woman take a fish from the net, scrape the scales of that fish, split it open, salted and fried the fish in aceite de coco. Her mommy squeezed lime on the fried fish in tajadas. Esta gringa ate fried fish con tajadas every day for lunch. Gracias a Dios, Columbus said, that Honduras saved his lost ass from the depths of the storm. Y esta gringa was saved from a contrived fantasy world of fake-believe dreams and its minstrel mouse. So that's my first poem. The second poem I'm going to read is called I Saw Celia Perform. And this is in reference to Celia Cruz. And it's from my book, Smoke. I saw Celia perform. At SOBs with my lover one night. Heard La Habanera sing praises to palm leaves waving, whispers of a lost homeland to carnivals of love, of life, to love negritos bembones being killed, of salacious black girls con enough tumbao to make men. I listened to her songs when I saw Celia, knowing its familiarity but lacking its words, but still telling my lover after several songs. Yeah, Abuelita used to play that song. Y mi abuelita told me her cipotas stories of hearing her neighbors say, Celia está en el pueblo performing, tenemos que ir. Waving her purple dress trimmed with glittering things in this West Village nightclub, over-flavored with energy, sucking in other cipotes from abuelitas who had Celia LP stacked next to the record player in their dining rooms, right under the devil Jesucristo. Lifting and showing just a little leg skin, suavecito con sabrosura. I held on to my lover, smiling to her voice, emanating high notes without any pain, louder than the band that needed her to stay with her tempo, and I reveled in her trip of Latina-ness, of giving position to Spanish-speaking Africans in the world of limbo force ethnic boxes. I teared. Inebriated, porque Cuba really estaba libre in this smoke-filled small venue with her on the stage, seeing her regal-colored wig spreading and shining out like a sunflower blossoming towards the sun. My lover and I talked about azúcar with mixed dreams of Cuban fantasies trapped in highballs of coke, lima, y ron, and African influence in cultures, the missing the non-castellano, and a woman who still can rock a crowd after generations of abuelitas y cipotes. And he held on to me, porque Cuba was freeing itself from my Honduran Jamaican existence as I sang, Hoy no hay que llorar, que la vida es un carnaval, es más bello vivir cantando. And I called abuelita home, aware of the hour difference, and I said, Be la reina, abuelita, be la reina. Thank you so much for giving me the space to share my poetry and to be part of this activism. This is important work that you are doing. I am so honored. I am so blessed. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Wow. Wow. Thank you, Mercy. My goodness. I'm so glad we, this is the positive about, yes.
I say, mercy. Don't have mercy on us. Mercy, don't have mercy on us.
Again, the positives of COVID, we get to connect with artists that otherwise sometimes we feel separated from. And this has been so nice to connect with you, Mercy. And I'm also going to say, if you're in New York and go to the Bronx, our former curator for the Lunada Literary Lounge, Sandra Garcia Rivera, is back there. Amazing poet, writer. You guys have to know each other.
Yes.
Yes, thank you for joining us. My goodness, chills.
Yes. This is great.
Love it.
Thank you.
Love it.
And shout out to my family. They're behind the laptop.
Yay!
My two children, my partner, they're all on the other side, and they're like cheering me on. So
Yay.
Love you.
Thank you, family, for supporting her. Always takes a village. Great, thank you. Olga, do you have some closing words?
Oh, I mean, this is amazing. What a beautiful send-off. Mercy, so glad that you're able to join us with your familia there and everybody, and Paola, Cleve Jones, of course, legendary organizer. And Annie, you put it all together and made it happen. So this is part of the work that we all get to do, and such a joy. And I don't know if we're gonna close it, Annie, just to say a little bit about the petition and the
first shout out to that, all the magic that happens. It's like 5 of us on the screen, but I also want to give a special shout out to the Galería team for also always making it happen. Yvette Diaz, thank you so much for bringing us also all together and getting all the details going. Henry behind the tech, who we never see, but he's always the heart and spirit getting us to be public. Thank you so much. And so for those of you that want to join us in terms of the caravan for the children's next steps, we are headed to DC tomorrow morning. You can join the virtual live send-off that we will be talking to all of our partner organizations, Instituto Familiar, Carecen, the Latinx Racial and Equity Project, and Chicana Latina Foundation. Join us as we're all a little sleepy with, sleep and trying to get our coffees and conversation that's going to be, inspiring, and you'll get to hear from others as to why we continue to do this work. And then on May 1st, you can also join the virtual program live starting at 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And so please sign the petition. It's really important. We have a little under 1,000 signatures. We want to get more signatures by the time we're in DC. Please sign the petition, and we'll continue to keep this petition on the side too in the comments. And then last but not least, also, sponsor and endorse the campaign. It's not too late. As we said, we will be pivoting to what happens after the 100 days. I think that's all that's on our minds, because we understand that this doesn't end on May 1st. So please, endorse the campaign. Please donate, continue to donate. We are continuing to bring, support to the organizations that we met across in Tijuana and San Diego. As we said before, it is not enough. It was just but a granito de arena that we added to the need that these kids have in these processing centers. And we want to be able to bring more support to those sister organizations. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for staying in touch with us and during these times. We hope that as things are opening up, we'll be able to see you in person, but we also are very committed to staying united in health and making sure that our community is safe, to making sure that everyone's vaccinated, and then coming back. And when we come back, we're going to throw the biggest freaking pachanga in the world, and y'all are invited, and we'll be there, and we hope to see you here, Mercy. But for now, we stay connected in health, and we wish you all health, joy, and love, and we'll see you in the next Lunada, which will be hosted moving forward for the rest of the year by the none other than Yosimar Reyes will be our host for the 2021 season. So thank you. See you May 1st. If those of you that want to wake up and see us, see the circus in action, join us tomorrow morning and share a few words and just, show us some love. Thank you, Cleve, so much. It's an honor. It's just the beginning. Thank you, Paola. Thank you, Mercy. And thank you, Olga, for always being willing to step in and hold space and holding us accountable and making the call, because it was her call to action that we all responded to. So thank you, Olga, for your spirit, for always, keeping us engaged and pushing us forward. Besos a todos. Buenas noches. Happy full moon. Go howl at the moon.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night. Great to see you, Mercy. Beautiful. Love it.
Bye, Annie.
Bye. Mucho gusto.